In the quietness of an ordinary morning, Daniel contemplated his reflection in the bathroom mirror, observing the marks that time and worries had left on his face. The deep, dark circles under his eyes and his tired countenance told the story of sleepless nights, while his slightly hunched posture revealed the invisible weight he carried on his shoulders. It wasn't just his body that showed signs of wear. His soul also seemed to be covered by a thin layer of dust accumulated over the years. Like many of us, Daniel had become a prisoner of his own story. Each morning brought with it the same familiar script, waking up with the feeling that something was missing, dragging himself through the day carrying unfulfilled expectations, and falling asleep with the empty promise that tomorrow would be different. The cycle repeated itself with almost cruel precision, like a clock that eternally marks the same hours. The Indian philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti once said that observing without evaluating is the highest form of human intelligence. However, for Daniel, each look in the mirror was accompanied by a relentless internal tribunal. His mind, shaped by years of self-criticism and unmet expectations, had become a severe judge, condemning each attempt at change before it could even blossom. In his book, The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle reminds us that most human suffering is unnecessary. It is created by you while the unconscious ego rules your life. This truth resonated silently in Daniel's life, even if he couldn't fully comprehend it yet. Each negative thought, each limiting belief, was like an invisible brick in a prison he had built himself over the years. The walls of this prison were not made of concrete and steel, but of painful memories, deep-rooted fears, and repetitive thought patterns. Like an artist who always paints with the same dark colors, Daniel had developed an involuntary mastery in recreating his own limitations. His mind had become a projector that continually replayed the film of his past failures, using them as irrefutable evidence of his future limitations. Neuroscientist Dr. Joe Dispenza, in his research on neuroplasticity and personal change, emphasizes that our thoughts create our reality. For Daniel, this reality had crystallized into a narrative of scarcity and frustration. Each negative experience was carefully catalogued by his mind as further proof that life was conspiring against him, while moments of joy and fulfillment were quickly discarded as exceptions to the rule. However, on that particular morning, something was different. As he observed his reflection, Daniel noticed a subtlety he had never noticed before. Behind the weariness in his eyes, there was a small spark of something more, a faint but persistent light that seemed to whisper about unexplored possibilities. It was as if, for the first time, he could see beyond the surface of the mirror, beyond the layers of stories he had told himself. The invitation to participate in the experiment arrived like an answer to a question he had not yet consciously formulated. It was as if the universe, in its mysterious dance of synchronicities, had chosen that specific moment to open a door that had always been there, waiting only to be noticed. The promise of reprogramming his mind and transforming his reality sounded simultaneously absurd and profoundly true. Dr. Bruce Lipton, in The Biology of Belief, presents scientific evidence of how our beliefs and perceptions can literally reshape our biology and, consequently, our reality. For Daniel, this idea represented both hope and a challenge. If it was true that his thoughts and emotions had created his current reality, did that mean he had the power to create something different? The decision to accept the invitation was not made on a rational level alone. It was as if something deeper within him, that same spark he had noticed in his eyes, had recognized this moment as an opportunity for transformation. It was as if a part of him, long dormant, was finally awakening to a greater possibility. As he closed the bathroom door that morning, Daniel didn't know he was about to embark on a journey that would challenge not only his beliefs about himself, but his very understanding of reality. The mirror that had served as a silent witness to his daily self-flagellation was about to become a portal to unexplored dimensions of his consciousness. The first day of the experiment dawned with a different clarity. Daniel woke up before the alarm, his body vibrating with a mixture of anxiety and expectation. The instructions for the protocol were clear and, at the same time, enigmatic. Observe. Your thoughts as if they were clouds passing through the sky of your consciousness. Don't try to change them, just notice their presence. This simple instruction, seemingly trivial, proved to be a monumental challenge. As psychologist Carl Jung noted, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. For Daniel, each moment of observation was like turning on a light in a dark room he had ignored for years. The first consciousness exercises revealed a surprising pattern. His negative thoughts were not occasional visitors in his mind. They had become permanent residents, decorating the walls of his consciousness with gloomy prophecies about his future. Every time an opportunity presented itself, a familiar voice whispered, "This is not for you. You will fail as always. We better not even try." Dr. Deepak Chopra, in his studies on consciousness and reality, states that we are all storytellers, and the stories we tell ourselves shape our experience of reality. Daniel began to realize that he had become an extremely skilled narrator of his own misfortune, weaving elaborate justifications to remain exactly where he was. As the day progressed, the observation exercise became more challenging. It was as if each negative thought, when noticed, resisted being exposed to the light of consciousness. Painful memories arose like waves, trying to drag his attention back to familiar patterns of self-sabotage. However, something extraordinary began to happen. In the brief moments when he managed to maintain the observer's posture, Daniel perceived a subtle space between his thoughts and his identity. As Rupert Spira teaches in his works on non-duality, you are not your thoughts. You are the consciousness that observes them. This discovery was like finding a small crack in a wall that had always seemed impenetrable. Through this crack, Daniel glimpsed a truth that would fundamentally change his understanding of himself. He was not the critical voice in his mind. He was the consciousness that could observe that voice. The protocol included practical exercises to interrupt automatic patterns of thought. Each time he caught himself in a negative cycle, Daniel was supposed to make a conscious pause, breathe deeply, and redirect his attention to the present moment. At first, these pauses seemed artificial and forced, like trying to learn a new language as an adult. But as he practiced, something began to change. The pauses became moments of clarity, small windows through which he could observe his mind in action. It was like watching a movie he had seen hundreds of times before, but now with a new understanding of the script. Dr. Daniel Siegel, in his work on interpersonal neurobiology, describes this process as mindsight, the ability to observe the patterns of our own mind. For Daniel, each moment of conscious observation was like developing a new muscle, strengthening his ability to be present without being completely absorbed by his thoughts. At night, exhausted but strangely alert, Daniel reviewed his notes from the day. He had documented dozens of negative thought patterns, each connected to a specific limiting belief. It was like taking inventory of a store he had managed blindly for years, finally discovering why he always seemed to be at a loss. It was in this moment of reflection that he had his first experience with what he would later recognize as the guardian of the past. As he observed his reflection in the bathroom mirror before going to bed, for a fraction of a second, he seemed to see a darker version of himself, a reflection that carried all the weight of his old beliefs and fears. The vision was brief, but left a profound impression. It was as if a part of him, the one that had invested years building and maintaining his limitations, was beginning to manifest, preparing for a battle for survival. Lying in bed, Daniel reflected on the words of the mystic Rumi. "What you seek is seeking you." Perhaps the guardian of the past was not an enemy to be defeated, but a part of himself that needed to be understood and integrated. Sleep came slowly, laden with vivid dreams of doors opening and closing, of corridors that seemed to have no end. At some point during the night, Daniel had the distinct sensation of being watched, not by something external, but by a deep and ancient part of his own consciousness. The second day of the experiment brought with it a depth that Daniel was not prepared to face. The meditations, now longer and more intense, were no longer simple observation exercises. They had transformed into portals to unexplored dimensions of his consciousness. Psychologist Carl Gustav Jung wrote extensively about the concept of shadow, that part of ourselves that we repress, deny, or try to hide. For Jung, the encounter with the shadow is a crucial step in the process of individuation, the path to psychic wholeness. Daniel was about to understand this truth in a deeply personal way. During the first meditation of the morning, the presence he had felt the night before became more tangible. It was no longer just a vague sensation of being watched. Now there was a distinct awareness of another version of himself, one that carried all his accumulated pains, fears, and resentments over the years. Dr. Stanislav Grof, a pioneer in the field of transpersonal psychology, describes how non-ordinary states of consciousness can give us access to deep aspects of our psyche that normally remain hidden. For Daniel, each meditation session was like diving into increasingly deeper waters of his being. The presence of the guardian of the past manifested itself in increasingly concrete ways. In the mirror, his reflection seemed to come to life, showing expressions that did not correspond to his own. It was as if he was face to face with a crystallized version of all his limiting patterns, an entity that had fed on every moment of doubt, every decision based on fear. Jacobo Grinberg-Zilberbaum, in his studies on altered states of consciousness, suggests that our perception of reality is a neuronal construction that can be modified through specific practices. For Daniel, the encounter with the Guardian was literally reconfiguring his understanding of the boundaries between the real and the imaginary. The voices in his mind, previously a confused chorus of self-criticism, now seemed to emanate from a specific source, the Guardian. Each attempt to visualize a different future was met with elaborate arguments about why change was impossible. "Remember the last time you tried something new," the Guardian whispered. "Remember the pain of failure." However, something unexpected began to happen. The more clearly Daniel perceived the presence of the Guardian, the more he began to understand its true nature. It wasn't a cruel enemy determined to destroy him. It was a part of himself that had assumed the role of protector, even if through limiting methods. Dr. Richard Schwartz, creator of internal family systems therapy, talks about how seemingly destructive parts of our psyche often have positive intentions, even if their strategies are maladaptive. The guardian of the past, Daniel began to realize, was like an overzealous sentinel, trying to protect him from possible disappointments by keeping him within the boundaries of the familiar. During a particularly intense meditation in the afternoon, Daniel experienced a vision that would fundamentally change his understanding of the process. He saw himself as a child in the moments after a particularly painful experience of rejection. It was at that moment that the Guardian had been born, a part of him that vowed never to allow himself to feel so vulnerable again. This understanding brought tears to his eyes. Years of resentment against himself began to dissolve into deep compassion. The Guardian was not his enemy. It was a frightened child wearing an adult's armor, doing the best it could with the limited tools it had at its disposal. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen master, teaches about the importance of embracing our pains with mindfulness and compassion. "Hold your pain with tenderness," he says, like a mother holding her crying baby. For Daniel, this approach began to transform his relationship with the Guardian. As the day progressed, synchronicities began to multiply. Small events, a message arriving at the exact moment, a casual encounter that provided exactly the information needed, seemed to confirm that there was a greater intelligence operating through the process. As Dr. Wayne Dyer suggests in his works on intention, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. The final hours of the second day brought a new layer of understanding. The Guardian of the past did not need to be defeated or expelled. It needed to be integrated. Each fear, each resistance was an invitation to a deeper understanding. Like a dance between light and shadow, Daniel began to realize that his transformation would not come through conflict, but through acceptance and integration. At the dawn of the third day, Daniel woke up with a clarity that seemed almost supernatural. The air around him had a different quality, as if reality itself had become more malleable. The words of quantum physicist Amit Goswami echoed in his mind. "Consciousness, not matter, is the ground of all being. The exercises on this last day were different. It was no longer just about observing or understanding. It was time to actively create a new reality. The protocol required Daniel to consistently maintain the mental and emotional state of his most evolved version, as if that transformation had already happened. Dr. Joe Dispenza, in his research on neurological change, demonstrates how our brain does not distinguish between a real experience and a vividly imagined one. For Daniel, each moment became an opportunity to install new neural patterns, like a programmer rewriting outdated code. The battle with the guardian of the past reached its apex during a particularly deep meditation. The voices of doubt and fear reached a deafening crescendo, as if all his limitations were making one last desperate effort to maintain their dominion. It was in this moment of maximum intensity that Daniel had a transformative epiphany. The guardian of the past was not just a manifestation of his fears, it was also the bearer of deep wisdom, accumulated through all his experiences, even the painful ones. Marianne Williamson writes that our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. For Daniel, this truth revealed itself in all its magnitude. The guardian was not just protecting him from failure, it was also protecting him from the magnitude of his own power. Synchronicities intensified to an almost surreal level. Each positive thought seemed to find an immediate manifestation in the external world. A genuine smile generated smiles back. A decision made with confidence opened doors he didn't even know existed. Michael Bernard Beckwith talks about living from vision, not from circumstances. For Daniel, this phrase gained new meaning. It was no longer about fighting against current circumstances, but about tuning so completely with his vision that reality had no choice but to reorganize itself to match it. As the third day unfolded, Daniel began to experience what mystics call the unitive state, moments of deep connection with something greater than himself. Dr. David Hawkins, in his work on levels of consciousness, describes how elevated states of consciousness have the power to transform not only the individual, but also the energy field around them. The presence of the guardian of the past began to transform. What before seemed an antagonistic force now revealed itself as an ally in the transformation process. Each fear, each resistance, was an opportunity to transform dense energy into light, like an alchemist transmuting lead into gold. Rupert Sheldrake, with his theory of morphogenetic fields, suggests that patterns of behavior and consciousness can create fields that influence reality at subtle levels. Daniel began to realize that his personal transformation had implications that went beyond his individual experience. The process was not linear. There were moments of intense doubt, followed by crystal clarity. As Ram Dass teaches, the spiritual path is a process of stripping away until the truth. For Daniel, each layer of illusion that dissolved revealed a deeper truth about his essential nature. The final hours of the experiment brought an understanding that transcended words. Daniel realized that his journey was not just about overcoming limitations, it was about awakening to a broader reality of who he really was. Ken Wilber, in his integral theory, talks about how different levels of consciousness represent successive expansions of identity. Daniel was experiencing this firsthand. His identity was no longer confined to the limits of his old beliefs. It was expanding to include possibilities that previously seemed unattainable. The guardian of the past, which before seemed a formidable adversary, now revealed itself as a valuable teacher. Each resistance had been an invitation to develop inner strength. Each fear had been an opportunity to cultivate courage. As the experiment came to an end, Daniel began to understand that true transformation was not about changing who he was, but about awakening to who he had always been. As Eckhart Tolle teaches, you are not the contents of your consciousness, you are the consciousness itself. The guardian of the past didn't need to be defeated, it needed to be embraced and integrated as a valuable part of the totality of his being. This understanding brought a deep peace, a feeling of completeness that transcended the duality of success and failure. Sri Aurobindo speaks about integral transformation, a change that encompasses all aspects of being. For Daniel, this transformation was happening at levels he was only beginning to understand. At the end of the 3 days, Daniel found himself in a state of grace. The battle had not been won through conflict, but through understanding and love. The guardian of the past had not been defeated, but transformed, from adversary to ally, from prison to portal. The choice between remaining in the past or freeing himself turned out to be a false dichotomy. True liberation came through integration, embracing all parts of himself, including those he previously tried to reject. As Dr. David Hawkins teaches, love is total surrender to the now. For Daniel, this surrender did not mean passivity, but a deep alignment with the flow of life. Each moment became an opportunity to choose again, to create consciously, to live fully. The journey had not ended. In fact, it was just beginning. But now Daniel understood that the path was not about reaching a destination, but about awakening more and more to the truth of who he had always been. And you, dear reader, who has followed this journey to this point, what aspects of your own story resonated with Daniel's transformation? What guardians of the past are waiting to be recognized and integrated in your life? The invitation for transformation is always present, whispering in the silence between your thoughts, waiting only to be heard. True change, as Daniel discovered, is not about becoming someone different, but about awakening. To the vastness of who you already are, the portal is open, the moment is now. The choice is yours. As Daniel stepped back into his daily life, he carried with him a profound sense of purpose and clarity. The world around him hadn't changed, but his perception of it had shifted dramatically. Everyday challenges that once seemed insurmountable now appeared as opportunities for growth and self-discovery. He began to notice how his new state of being influenced those around him. Colleagues remarked on his increased confidence and positivity. Relationships that had been strained began to heal as he approached them with newfound compassion and understanding. Even strangers seemed to respond differently to his presence, as if sensing the shift in his energy. Daniel's professional life took an unexpected turn. Ideas that he had been too afraid to voice in the past now flowed freely. He found himself taking on projects that aligned more closely with his values and passions. His work became not just a means of earning a living, but a canvas for expressing his authentic self. The integration of the guardian of the past continued to be a daily practice. There were moments when old fears and doubts would surface, but Daniel now had the tools to recognize them for what they were, echoes of old patterns rather than absolute truths. He learned to engage with these parts of himself with curiosity and compassion, often finding that they held valuable insights when approached with openness. As weeks turned into months, Daniel noticed that the synchronicities he had experienced during the experiment had become a regular part of his life. It was as if the universe was constantly providing gentle nudges and confirmations, guiding him towards his highest potential. He developed a deep trust in the flow of life, learning to balance purposeful action with a willingness to surrender to the greater wisdom of the moment. His relationships deepened and transformed. Old friendships were rekindled, and new connections formed with like-minded individuals who were also on paths of self-discovery. Daniel found himself naturally stepping into the role of a mentor, sharing his experiences and insights with others who were struggling with their own guardians of the past. 1 year after the experiment, Daniel stood once again in front of the bathroom mirror. The face that looked back at him was familiar, yet profoundly different. The lines of worry had softened, replaced by an expression of quiet confidence and inner peace. His eyes, once clouded with doubt, now shone with a clarity and purpose that was unmistakable. As he reflected on the journey of the past year, Daniel realized that the 3-day experiment had been just the beginning. The real transformation had happened in the countless small choices he had made each day since then, choices to remain present, to act with integrity, to embrace all aspects of himself and his experience. The guardian of the past was still there, but its role had changed. What was once a force of limitation had become a source of wisdom and strength. Daniel had learned to listen to its cautions without being controlled by them, to honor his past experiences, while remaining open to new possibilities. As he prepared to start his day, Daniel felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over him. Gratitude for the challenges that had led him to this point, for the wisdom of the guardian that had protected him for so long, and for the courage to step into the unknown. He understood now that transformation was not a destination, but an ongoing journey. Each day brought new opportunities to choose, to grow, to awaken, and with each choice, he was not just changing his own life, but contributing to the evolution of consciousness itself. As he stepped out into the world, Daniel carried with him the knowledge that he was part of something greater than himself. His individual journey of transformation was interconnected with the journeys of countless others, all part of the grand tapestry of human evolution. The story of Daniel's transformation doesn't end here, for in truth, it has no end. It continues in the lives he touches, in the inspiration he shares, and in the ripple effects of his awakened presence in the world. And perhaps, dear reader, it continues in you, as you reflect on your own guardians of the past and the vast potential that lies within you, waiting to be awakened. For in the end, we are all Daniel. We are all on a journey of remembering who we truly are, of integrating our shadows, and of stepping into the fullness of our being. The invitation is always there, in every moment, to choose love, to choose presence, to choose the path of awakening. And so, as we close this chapter of Daniel's story, we open to the infinite possibilities that lie ahead. For every ending is a new beginning, and every moment holds the potential for transformation. May you, like Daniel, find the courage to face your guardians, the wisdom to integrate your past, and the love to embrace all that you are. For in doing so, you not only transform your own life, but contribute to the transformation of the world.